So have you ever had a situation where things were under control and then before you knew it, they were not? I had one of these yesterday in a pretty inconsequential way. My boys really like to play Minecraft. And to be clear, I'm aware I'm a 40-year-old man about to tell you this story, okay? I have come to really enjoy Minecraft, okay? I started playing it just because the boys like it, and I wanted to kind of understand it to be able to play with them a little bit, and then got into it and was like, hey, this is actually a pretty fun game. So I don't play video games a ton, but I'll go through stretches where for a few weeks I'll play one game a lot. And then I won't for several months at all, and then one game, so I'm in one of those phases right now with Minecraft, all right? So yesterday I'm playing, and if you play Minecraft, your heart's probably gonna ache with me on this. If you don't, it's okay. I think you're still gonna understand a little bit of what I'm talking about. So yesterday in the game, I decide to try something I've never done before, and that's explore a nether fortress, which is an important part of progressing in the game, all right? So I see some laughs right now. Some people already know what's coming. So I go, I'm all geared up, I'm ready to go. I get there, I start exploring, I'm doing good. Like everything's under control, I'm solid. And then I get up into this tower, and then a wither skeleton comes, and I try to kill it, and I mean to put a block down, and I miss. And then he comes, and then another one comes up, and I start freaking out, because these guys are dangerous. So I take off running, and I go out, and I'm jumping, because you run faster when you jump in Minecraft. I don't understand it, but I'm jumping while I'm running, and all at once I jump, and right when I jump, a skeleton hits me with their arrow, and it pushes me into a lava lake. And I die, just dead. All my gear is gone. It burns in the lava. And within 30 seconds, I went from being like, all right, I'm in good shape. Like, this is the best I've ever done in this game, to being like, I don't ever want to touch a video game controller again the rest of my life. Just like that, totally under control, to I have lost every bit of progress that I made in this game, and I don't like this game at all anymore. I mean, now listen, again, I'm aware I'm a 40-year-old man telling you this story, and probably some of you are like really starting Easter Sunday with Minecraft. It's okay. A few years ago, I started Easter Sunday with Dennis Rodman, so this is less weird than that, okay? Here's the thing, that's a stupid and it's an inconsequential example of this, but we all have had situations in our lives. We've all been through seasons in life where we had everything together, stuff was going our way, we felt like we had things under control, and then before we knew it, we found ourselves in a position where it's like, what happened? I don't really know how I got here. I mean, like, I can look at the events, but I don't know how I ended up from here to here, and everything that I've been working for just it's like it's gone. It's like it doesn't even matter anymore. This is a common thing in life. It's common in different seasons of life, and it may be that it's something that happens in a very small way. It may be it's something that happens in a big way. It might be that we've made just a lot of progress in life, and then the next season of life feels like everything's falling apart. Or it may be that there's just some project at work where like things are good and then they're not. I don't know, but we all understand what this is like. These seasons of life where for whatever reason, for one reason or another, it kind of feels like stuff's just closing in around us, and we don't have a great way out. Right? Now, the Bible has a lot to say about this idea, and there's one word in particular in the Old Testament of the Bible. It's a Hebrew word that gets at this idea. It's a really interesting word. And the word, we're going to do just a little bit of work on this today. The Hebrew word, it's psalmavet. You don't need to remember that. You don't need to try to write it down. I don't know how to write those letters. I don't know how to say those letters. I have books that tell me how. Psalmavet. This is a word that means the deepest darkness, or a condition of darkness that's associated with gloom and with danger and with foreboding. It's not a place. It's a thing we experience. For some of us, we've been in these seasons maybe relatively recently. For some of us, maybe we haven't been, but we've all been in a season at some point in time where we've experienced psalmavet, where there's just been this foreboding in life of like, I don't know how I got here, but I don't know how to get out of here either. Psalmavet. This is an important word for us today because we're in the middle of a message series called The Good Shepherd. We started it last week, and we're going to explore it a little bit more today. And this word is going to come up in the passage we're going to read today. And it's a really important word on this Easter Sunday. Now, if you're not familiar with the 23rd Psalm, or if you're not aware of it, you actually probably are. This is one of the more famous Bible passages that exists. If you've been to a funeral at any point in time in your life, there's a decent chance you heard Psalm 23 read, or at least part of it. And generally speaking, probably the most common use of Psalm 23 is exactly that. It might be at a funeral or something of that nature. But Psalm 23 is much bigger than that. It goes far beyond something like that. The beginning of Psalm 23 starts like this, and this isn't going to be on the screen, but I wanted to at least read it for you. This is what we covered last week. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake." I love verses 1 through 3 of the 23rd Psalm because they're just this idyllic, peaceful image, right? And in the midst of a life that can be pretty hectic, especially for me with 3 young kids and a lot of responsibilities, they're words that just make my soul feel calm. We talked about that last week. We broke a little bit of that down. But as peaceful and as calming as those words are, David, the man who wrote this psalm, begins to shift the imagery just a little bit in the next verse. And that's what brings us to today. So this is Psalm 23, verse 4. David writes, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." And we're going to pause right there because that phrase, the shadow of death, that's our Hebrew word that we talked about a minute ago, psalmavet, the shadow of death. It's not the location of death. That's a different Hebrew word. It's a shadow of death. These are the seasons of life where we are walking through a time where it just feels like there's darkness closing in around us. Now, for David, who wrote this psalm, you got to understand right off the bat, we talked about this some last week too, but David was a shepherd. He eventually did some other things in his life that were pretty important. But David, as a young man, was a shepherd. So when he writes, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," and he begins to lay out this shepherding imagery, this would have been an experience that was near and dear to David's heart. These would have been things David had experienced over and over and over again. And when David writes this passage for us today as English readers who don't probably generally deal with sheep and shepherds, certainly not nomadic sheep and shepherds, the analogy falls a little bit flat. But it's a powerful, powerful image. The valley of the shadow of death for David, when we say that, we might think of a valley in terms of I love driving to the southern part of the country, like the East Coast, when we've got to go down through the mountains of Virginia. I love that part of the drive where right when you get through West Virginia and you get through the first part of Virginia, you go up onto this ridge, and then all at once as you're going south on the left-hand side of the road, it opens up into these huge valleys. It's gorgeous. And that might be, when you read the valley of the shadow of death, that might be the image you have. That's certainly the image I have when I think of valleys. But when David writes the valley of Psalmavet, that's not at all the image he has in mind. What David would have had in mind was not so much a wide valley, but a narrow canyon or ravine. So when we read valley, it doesn't translate perfectly. David would have thought of a canyon, of a ravine. He would have thought of a fairly narrow passageway with very steep walls on either side that light had a hard time getting into. That's the image we should have. Now, I don't know why the writers of the various translations tend to translate this valley of the shadow of death. I don't know, but that's the translational choice that they made. But if you're thinking wide valley, it's not actually what David gets at, because the word psalmavet would have never been used in a context where light could easily invade that location. In fact, David would have used that word to indicate a place that light had a hard time getting to. Again, psalmavet means a deepest darkness. It means that this experience of kind of foreboding and danger. Well, if you're in a wide valley, that's not the experience you have. If you're a shepherd with sheep in a wide valley, you can see predators from a long way off. If there's a lot of light, it's not hard to see what's coming. And so it's relatively easy to protect your flock. But if you're a shepherd that's leading a flock of sheep through a narrow ravine or canyon, where there's not a lot of light, there's going to be things maybe hiding in the dark. that you can't see. If there's a wolf or if there's a lion or if there's a bear around the corner, you don't see it because you can't. There's a barrier. If a predator were to come up behind your flock of sheep, there's nowhere to go. You're penned in. The experience of leading a flock of sheep through a canyon would be wildly different than that of leading it through a wide open valley with lots of light. And so as David writes this, we got to understand when he writes, when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, David is almost certainly imagining, picturing in his mind physical locations he's been with his flock of sheep where there was danger. David is trying to explain that there's this sense where I have nowhere to go. I can't turn to the right or to the left. I only have forward. There's danger here. There's danger there. There's darkness. And when there's darkness, when we can't see, that's even more scary. David is expressing this sense of dread. When I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And for David, coming off of talking about this peaceful valley, talking about these beautiful streams, it's a strong departure, or at least it seems like it on the surface. But he doesn't end this little section here. And even though we tend to use this at funerals, and I think that's part of why, because we talk about the valley of the shadow of death, what David says next is critical. As he continues, he writes, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. When I walk through the darkest places, when I'm experiencing foreboding and dread, when it seems like there's darkness just closing in around me and I have nowhere to turn, David says, I won't fear. I won't fear. I won't fear evil. I won't fear bad things. I won't fear what I don't know yet is coming. I'm not going to fear. Why? Because you, the shepherd, are with me. See, David is writing this from the perspective of someone who has been a shepherd, but in the psalm, he is a sheep. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. When I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, when I as the sheep walk through that valley, I don't have to worry because my shepherd is with me. His rod and his staff comfort me. I did a little bit of research on the rod and the staff because, I don't have a lot of experience with nomadic shepherds either. The rod and the staff are interesting. They're two tools that every nomadic shepherd would have carried with them. The rod, if you think of a rod, you might think of like a stick, but that's not what it was at all. The rod was a club that was about 2.5-ish feet long that would have been narrow on one end like a handle and had a big bulb on the other end. And it was a weapon. The rod, shepherds often would drive nails partway into the bulb and leave the heads exposed. And they would use this club as a way to fend off things like bears and lions and wolves. It was an offensive weapon, okay? It was an instrument of destruction. Skilled shepherds may even use it and they may even throw it. So that's the rod that David refers to. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. It's an offensive weapon. The staff, on the other hand, was a very long stick, almost like a walking stick, a very tall stick that would have had a large hook on the end of it. And that stick would have been used partially for the shepherd to walk with. But more than that, it would have been used when the sheep got itself into trouble. So if a sheep got stuck in like a briar patch, well, I don't want to stick my hand in the briar patch. I'd rather not get my arm torn up, So the shepherd would use the hook end of the stick to hook the sheep and gently pull it back out of the briars. If a sheep happened to step off of a ledge, and I don't know if you knew this or not, but sheep don't jump well. If a sheep got down onto a little ledge and couldn't get back up, the shepherd would use the hook and they would hook the sheep and lift them. So the rod was a weapon. The rod was an instrument of aggression toward predators. The staff, on the other hand, was a tool of gentleness toward the sheep. So as David writes, your rod and your staff, they comfort me, it makes sense because to a sheep, the rod is the thing that protects you from the predators and the staff is the thing that protects you from yourself. When I walk through the darkest valley, if I'm a sheep, when I walk through the darkest valley, I don't have to worry because my shepherd is a good shepherd, and that shepherd has the tools necessary to protect me, to keep me safe, to ensure that whether something comes at me or I just have a misstep, I'm okay. I'm safe. It's also important to understand that for a sheep, the scariest situation they could find themselves in would be that their shepherd's gone. because the shepherd was the only way that they could be safe. Sheep are not aggressive animals. Sheep are not very smart animals. They're actually fairly well known for being kind of dumb. A lone sheep on its own wandering through a narrow canyon, it's going to be lunch for something. It's not going to make it. The shepherd, in other words, is the source of protection for the sheep. If the shepherd's gone, if something happens to the shepherd, the sheep have no hope. And that's important because later on in the Bible, we find in John chapter 10 that Jesus identifies himself as a shepherd. In fact, he identifies himself as the good shepherd. And when he does, he says something that's very curious if you understand shepherding in this way. We read this verse last week, and we'll probably read parts of it throughout this whole series, because as David writes in the Psalms, he's writing 1,000 years before Jesus is around. He's writing of God the Father. But when Jesus, the Son of God, comes to earth, he takes the mantle of the Good Shepherd. And the analogy holds. So David, writing before Jesus, Jesus then coming along saying, I'm the shepherd. We got to understand that to get where we need to go today. So Jesus in John chapter 10 says this, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I'll pause real fast there. Because again, let's go back to something I said a moment ago. For the sheep, that isn't necessarily good news. If I'm a sheep, I want a shepherd that's willing to lay down his life. I want a shepherd that is willing to do what is necessary to protect me, even if it's at cost to them. But I don't want the shepherd to go, yeah, I'll die. I'm going to die. Because now my protection is gone. I imagine that Jesus in this scenario, when he says this to the people hearing him that day, they would have kind of cocked their head at this point, like, if you're the shepherd, why, be willing to lay down your life? But that's not what Jesus says. Jesus says, I lay down my life. Now, this is foreshadowing. Jesus is prophesying what's to come, and the people there don't understand it that day. But again, it's curious until he continues. As he does, he says, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They're going to listen to my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. And then he says, the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. Which again, at this point, would have been a curious thing for people to hear. Now, what does that mean? I have authority to lay down my life and take it up again? If I'm a sheep, I'm not sure what to think of this. I've never seen a shepherd that's died and then come back to life. Is that even what he means? But it is exactly what Jesus means. And although the people hearing it that day wouldn't have totally understood, they would soon enough, because not long after, Jesus was crucified. He died in a very public way. As he did, something really interesting happens on the cross. In Matthew chapter 27, Matthew records this. He says, from noon until 3 p.m, darkness came over all the land. And about 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Noon to 3 p.m. is not the time it's supposed to be dark. Noon to 3 is the time it's supposed to be bright. But instead of it being bright on this day, it becomes dark. People throughout the centuries have attempted to explain this away. Maybe it was an eclipse. Maybe it was, I don't know what happened that day. Except that I know the presence of God left his son. It left Jesus. For the first time in Jesus' existence, God the Father was not with him. Because in that moment, Jesus had taken on the sin of the world. And as he bore the sin of the world, your sin, my sin, everyone that has ever lived and breathed, as he bore the weight of that sin on his shoulders, God the Father couldn't be with him any longer because he can't be in the presence of sin. And so he left. What Jesus experienced on the cross, as Matthew records that darkness covered the land, I don't think that's an accidental detail. Let's go back to our Hebrew word, salmavet. the deepest darkness, a sense of foreboding and dread. That is exactly what Jesus experienced hanging on the cross that day, to a degree that none of us could possibly ever fathom. Because the Son of God on that day lost the presence of his Father. There was nothing but darkness in Jesus that day. Not because of who he was, but because the Father had left him. That is why in that moment, as Jesus hung on the cross, he yelled out, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus was walking in the valley of the shadow of death in the most literal way possible. In a way that you and I have never experienced and we never will. See, the Good Shepherd, he doesn't just understand what it is to experience the valley of the shadow of death, kind of. And it might be easy to look at Jesus and go, okay, if Jesus is the Son of God, like, cool, big deal. I mean, that's a pretty sweet gig to be the Son of God. Except that in this moment, as Jesus took on the sin of the world, he not only walked through the valley of the shadow of death, but he walked it in a way that no human ever has or ever will again. When David writes in the Psalms, "When I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me." If I'm a sheep, the shepherd that I want is a shepherd who's walked through the valley already and knows the way. I want a shepherd who's been there and done that. I want a shepherd that I can look at and go, well, you're not brand new at this, so maybe you'll get me through safely. Which makes what happens next even more profound, because not only does Jesus enter the valley of the shadow of death, remember that what I said earlier, Psalmavet is not a place, it's not a location, it's an experience. Jesus in this moment is experiencing Psalmavet, but just a little while later he dies. And Jesus not only tastes the valley of the shadow of death, Jesus tastes death itself. The place, the state of being, not the experience, the finality of death itself. Not the shadow of it, the real thing. And for Jesus' followers, it's the end. They have no hope. They're scared, they run, they hide. Because to them, all they can think is, Jesus has died. If Rome could get to Jesus, then they certainly can get to us. And although Jesus had said many times what was going to happen, it still didn't click for them, because no one comes back from the dead. No one beats Roman crucifixion. When the Romans kill you, you're done. And for Jesus' followers, that's what they thought had happened. They thought that it was over. And yet, as Saturday passed and Sunday morning came, something changed. A couple of Jesus' friends, a couple women went to the tomb. It's interesting to me that the men didn't. The men were trying to make sense of everything, I assume, but a couple women go to the tomb and they go just to kind of decorate it a little bit. But when they get there, they encounter something they did not expect. We find this in Matthew chapter 28. There's an angel, and the angel says to the women, "Do not be afraid." The first thing the angel says, do not be afraid. You're in Psalmavet right now. You're in the valley of the shadow of death. It's foreboding, there's gloom. You think there is no future, but do not be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now, I have told you. So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy. And then suddenly Jesus met them. I just want to, listen, I can't wait to meet Jesus one day because I think he's real funny. I truly think he's a really funny guy. Because he says things in the Bible sometimes that are like, what? This guy's, he's dead. He's risen from the dead. He sees his friends coming and he's like, hey, what's up? Greetings, he says to them. Like what? No, hey, greetings. I mean, come on. That's pretty funny. I think he's going to be a lot of fun. Greetings, he says. They came to him, they clasped his feet and they worshiped him. And then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Both the angel and Jesus reiterate it. Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. See, this is the moment that changed all of human history. As a pastor, I've spent a lot of years trying to tell people about Jesus, trying to explain why he matters, and it's hard sometimes because he's a guy that lived 2,000 years ago. And we have these words written about him in a book. But they're words in a book. I've never met him face to face. I've never spoken with him. I've never given him a hug. I've never seen him walk into a room physically with my eyes. I've never heard his voice audibly. And so it's easy to just kind of feel like sometimes it's just a big fairy tale. But that day 2,000 years ago changed everything. It changed the course of human history. And it changed the course of human history for one reason. Because a man who was dead walked out of a grave. Now, if I'm a sheep and I'm trying to pick out a shepherd to follow, and I'm looking around, I'm going to be looking for the shepherd that looks the strongest, that looks the toughest, that looks the most experienced. Like, I want to find the shepherd that, at least to my eye, looks like he knows what he's doing, right? He's been through some wars. He's got some scars. And if one of those shepherds was like, hey, come follow me because I came back from the dead, that valley of the shadow of death, that's nothing. I beat death, not the shadow of it. I beat the real thing. First of all, I'd say, no, you didn't, because nobody does. But if I saw it, I would never follow another soul the rest of my life, because no one beats death. No one walks out of a grave. No one wins that fight. But Jesus did. And because he did, when we read the words, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. When we read the words, when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. We don't just get to follow a shepherd who defeated the shadow of death. We get to follow a shepherd that defeated death itself. He doesn't just know the way through, he paved it. So what would I have to fear? What possibly could I have to fear? And why would I ever in a million years follow any other shepherd? Because they might be tough. They might know how to fight a lion. They might know how to fight a bear. They might know how to fight off a wolf. They might know how to get to the green pastures. They might know all of it. But at some point, they're going to leave me. They're going to stay in the grave. Jesus won't. See, ultimately, when we look at this psalm, when we look at the stories of Jesus in the New Testament, what is so impactful, what matters so much, the reason why today matters is because Jesus walked out of a grave. And that means that he is not just a shepherd, he is the shepherd. He's the shepherd. He's not just another one, not just another good teacher, not just another prophet, not just another religious figure. In all the religions of the world and all the prophets and there is no one who has claimed to come back from the dead whose name has endured except Jesus Christ of Nazareth. He is the only one. He is the only one. And if there was one shred of evidence that it wasn't true, it would have been produced at some point in the last 2,000 years. Rome would have shut it down like that if they had a body. And if they didn't have a body, they'd have found the body. And they'd have produced it. But instead, 2 millennia later, in churches and gatherings all over the world today, people celebrate the resurrection of a man of flesh and blood. We celebrate a shepherd who not only defeated a shadow of death, who defeated death itself, who rose from the dead. And that shepherd is a shepherd worth following. When I follow that shepherd, I never have anything to fear. And as amazing as that is, there's something else with Jesus that is just as amazing to me, which is that you don't have to earn a place in his flock. You don't have to do some special, specific thing that earns you his love and his favor. something else really that sets Jesus apart from virtually every other religious figure that's ever lived, every other mythology, every other figurehead. Our God, Jesus, the Son of God, they don't say, hey, measure up to all the stuff first, get clean, and then you can have a place with me. But rather they say, we're gonna come for you in your messy state, and you can go ahead and have a place. All you got to do is follow me. So I want you to imagine it like this. If we were all shepherds and we had a huge herd of sheep, and we all went in and we started calling to different sheep, and the sheep would have to choose which shepherd they were following, right? All Jesus says is, just listen to my voice and follow me. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to prove that you can get yourself out of the jams. You don't have to prove you can get off the ledge. You don't have to prove that you're smart enough to not run in the briar bush. You don't have to prove that you can fight a lion. You just got to listen to me. Just follow me. I'm walking this way. If you just want to walk with me, you can. The Apostle Paul, who has an amazing story himself, writes it this way in the book of Romans. He says, if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and if you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. In our shepherding analogy, if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you can be a part of that flock. You can be a part of his herd. He continues and says, as Scripture says, anyone who believes in him will never be put to shame. For there's no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all and richly blesses all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So how then can they call on the one they haven't believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. And today in this moment, this is exactly what we're doing. I'm standing on a stage telling you about the man I know, the shepherd that has led me for nearly 40 years, the Good Shepherd. And I'm telling you about that man because early in my life, men and women faithfully told me about that same shepherd. They showed me what it was to live out faith in that shepherd. And at a certain point in time in my life, when I was about 5 years old, I confessed with my mouth that Jesus was Lord, and I believed that he was raised from the dead. And he welcomed me into his flock, and I've spent a lifetime trying to walk with him. Sometimes really well, and other times getting stuck in a whole bunch of briar patches. But every time he's pulled me back out with that hook, every time he's beaten off the enemies as they come toward me, and he's remained faithful, and he's remained good, and he has never, ever failed me. I spent many years trying to earn his love because that's the natural thing to do. But the truth is I never had to, because he loved me before I knew me. He loved me before I was a dream in my parents' hearts. He loved me from the foundations of the world, and he loves you the same. When the Bible says, confess with your mouth that he's Lord and believe in your heart that he was raised from the dead, you might go, well, but I have to do something. No, you don't. And here's why. When you believe in your heart that Christ was raised from the dead, an important thing happens. What you say to God is, you're a truth teller. See, if you don't believe the resurrection happened, you're telling God he's a liar. Period. Now, I don't know about you, but if you were to come to me and say, hey, I like you pretty well, but I don't think you're trustworthy, we wouldn't have a great relationship. It wouldn't be great, you know? If I came to you and said, I really like all the things that you say, but I just don't believe that you're honest. You'd be like, okay, we probably aren't gonna hang out, you know? When we don't believe the resurrection is a real thing that happened, that Jesus truly was raised from the dead, what we're saying to God is the most important, costly thing you ever did. I don't believe it was real. See, when we believe in our hearts that Christ was raised from the dead, what we're saying to God is, I choose to trust that this unbelievable thing that happened, when you say it did, that means it did. You are trustworthy. You are dependable. I'm not doing anything. All I'm doing is saying to God, I believe you. And when we believe someone's trustworthy, their relationship can grow and it can flourish. But if we don't believe the person is trustworthy, then I could say I believe in Jesus, but I believe he was a person, but I don't believe he was raised from the dead. But then as As Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is now walking and calling us, why would we have any reason to follow him as opposed to another shepherd? When we believe in our heart, we don't earn God's love. We simply accept God's love. And when we confess with our mouth that he's Lord, when you think Lord, you might think of a deity. That's a Lord, right? But to Paul, who wrote this letter, a Lord wasn't a deity. A Lord was just an authority. They would have called a king authority. They would have called Caesar Lord. They would have called heads of large families Lord. It was just a term of authority. So when Paul says, believe in your heart that Christ was raised from the dead, believe in this one central thing, and then just tell Jesus he's in charge. All that is saying, I'll follow that shepherd. That shepherd's the one that came back from the dead, and I'll listen when he talks. That's all he's saying. Not to earn a place. But I can't very well follow him if I don't believe he's really who he says he is, and if I won't listen to what he says. Now, here's the deal. Today, many of you here today are Christians. You have followed Jesus for many years, or at least for some years. You have given your life to Jesus. You have tried your best to follow him. And so this may not be overall a message that's super applicable to you, except to say, your shepherd is good and he's trustworthy. And maybe you just need to hear that. Maybe you're in a season where you've been following the Lord, but he feels distant. Maybe he feels disconnected. Maybe Jesus feels like he's a million miles away. Maybe you have that sense of foreboding. Maybe you are in the valley of the shadow of death right now, and it feels like God is not there with you. He is. He is. The funny thing about darkness is you can't see, but that doesn't mean that there's not presence. So if you're in the middle of the valley of the shadow of death today and you're doing your best to follow the shepherd, I want you to know he's there. But maybe you're here today and you've never chosen to follow that shepherd. Maybe you are here today and you have been your own shepherd throughout your life. Maybe you've chosen to listen to what other people tell you. Maybe you've chosen to give in to doubt and to fear. Maybe, I don't know what it might be, but maybe for whatever reason you're here today and you've never chosen to follow the Good Shepherd. Maybe when you hear things like he leads me beside still waters, and he restores my soul, maybe that brings you something inside that, well, it might just be that the Good Shepherd is calling your name and wants you to be a part of his flock. Because if I know anything about the Bible, what I know is this: Jesus came to this earth and was obedient to death because of his love for you and for me, for every person in this room and every person that's ever breathed a breath on this earth. He made you, he formed you, and he wants you to come home with him. He's trustworthy. He's dependable. Every one of us is following a shepherd. Today, we're all following some shepherd. The question is just, which shepherd are you following? The good one? Not a good one. The good shepherd? The King of Kings? The Lord of Lords? Or just any other shepherd? In a minute, what we're going to do is I'm going to pray. And if you're here today and you're already a believer in Jesus, here's what I want you to do. I want to ask you today, as I start to pray, I want to ask you to pray for the people around you who are not walking with the Good Shepherd. I just want to ask you to pray for them. Because in this moment, I believe that the Lord is calling somebody's name. I believe that Jesus, who died on a cross, who 2,000 years ago was raised from the dead, he did not endure all that so we could just sit and gather and be like, yay, we feel better after Easter Sunday. He did it all so that we could go tell the world that Jesus is risen. And so today, as we pray in a moment, I'm going to invite people who maybe haven't ever made that decision to make that decision. And if you're a Christian today, I want to ask you to pray that the voice of God would be so loud in their hearts that they could not possibly turn away from it. We serve a king, a shepherd, who is not dead, but he is alive. And he is the hope of the world. Let's pray today.